October 1999, a Learjet 35 crashed, killing all aboard due to hypoxia. Recently, Christy and I did a investigative video on this. We're going to go behind the scenes on it on this episode of Taking Off Podcast. Hello and welcome to the podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, we do have the 360 video going so you can see our world headquarters for podcasting in my office here in Haltom City outside of Fort Worth, Texas. Christy, welcome again.
Thank you. It's funny. I almost prefer doing this from the hotel room because when I'm here, I have all the microphones and I can hear everything. And I almost feel like I'm doing ASMR.
ASMR?
Yeah, it's like where people talk really softly and quietly into the microphone. Welcome to Taking Off,
Oh, I guess we could do that. We could talk like this the whole way through. And I don't know ASMR. I just know that from like Parks and Rec. They had those characters who did the radio show.
Yeah, they were joking. It was kind of a spoof on the radio. But anyway, we're here today to talk about something that's not quite as funny.
Okay, I remember 1999. I was in a big switch in my life. I left my full-time job to go chase movie making. And that had happened only 2 months before this event. And I was an avid golfer.
Is that what your full-time job was?
Golfing? No. I wish, though, at the time. I certainly did. I played whenever I could. I organized golf tournaments with my clients. I watched golf. I was everything. The way I am about aviation right now was the way I was with golf then.
Spooky.
Yeah, so I was really, really into golf. And one of my favorite golfers was Payne Stewart. The guy he stood out. He wore the throwback clothes from the from the 20th century.
He was very garish.
Garish
in his clothing and attire.
I remember he had the NFL who sponsored him, and so his old style clothes would be an NFL team, the Chicago Bears or whoever it was. It was, but even more than the clothes, his swing was butter. It was so smooth. For those of us that golf, you look at his swing and even his fellow golfers, professional golfers on the tour, out of everybody, he had one of the purest, sweetest swings that there were.
See, I've never been a golfer, so I can't really appreciate that. I appreciated some of the other things. I was a teenager when all of this went down. I mean, I heard the name Payne Stewart before the crash, so I knew who he was. We've mentioned this before on the podcast, but there's a lot of research and a lot of time that goes into making these, 15-minute videos. It took days for us to write the script and go through everything. And I still feel like we didn't get everything that I necessarily wanted into it. So some of the stuff that we're going to talk about today is definitely going to be an add-on to the video that we did.
This podcast is the companion piece for our shorter investigative video.
Absolutely.
So make sure you go watch that if you haven't. And that's our official report. I remember I was in my car just off of I-35 north of downtown Dallas, near Inwood and all that. And when I was listening to sports radio, the Ticket 1310 in Dallas-Fort Worth was a relatively new phenomenon. And but it was growing. It was huge, and the news broke on the Ticket, and I was glued to the radio from then on.
Yeah, I was a teenager. I remember after I got out of school that day, I went home and I turned on the TV, and it was everywhere. It was all over the news, and I just remember going, "Oh my gosh!" And then as more stuff was coming out, it wasn't until later when I realized that one of the pilots was a young female. That's when things really started to resonate with me. Not that, because, these types of incidents don't happen every day, especially in my young teenage brain. You don't have airplanes falling out of the sky like this, and nobody really knew what was going on at the time. And so learning that there was a female pilot, it just hit different.
Interesting. For me, what was really bizarre about that, because when the news broke on the radio, the plane was still up there. And by the way, neither one of us were pilots when this happened.
No.
And we were decades away from becoming pilots. So I'm sitting there as an adult. You're a teenager. And we're listening to this play out in real time. You know, they started reporting that there is a private jet that's unresponsive heading north over the Midwest of the United States. And then they mentioned, and Payne Stewart's on board. So nobody was dead yet. The plane was still flying. And I'm thinking, surely there's a way they can safely bring it down.
Yeah, just grab it with a net.
Big
old butterfly net.
Well, yeah, I was thinking more in terms of, watch too many movies, and I was doing movie making at the time. Can't they just put a guy on a harness out of a C-17 and,
Mission Impossible,
Kurt Russell, somebody, executive action.
Throw Tom Cruise out there, he'll get it.
Yeah, and they can get on board and save everybody. But the naivety, of course, of being a lot younger and not being pilots. There is absolutely nothing anyone can do in this situation.
And hypothetically, even if they could throw Tom Cruise out there, they don't really have time to do any of that because the airplane had already been in the air for so long. I think it had a little over 4 hours of fuel on board, like 4 hours and 45 minutes, I believe was what it was, something like that. And they were coming up against that clock already when the second and third interception happened.
So there were 3 what we call interceptions. There was the first one. Well, let's back up a little bit. So the plane, if you watch their video, the plane departed Orlando International at around 9:20 in the morning, and it was on its way to Dallas. Now, the thing about flying from Orlando to Dallas, which I've done in Lola, my 210, you don't fly a direct line.
No.
And the reason why is because of the Gulf of Mexico. Now, can you not fly over the Gulf? Certainly you can. But flying is a risky business, and you minimize your risks whenever possible. And if you can stay within gliding distance of the shore, well, then let's do that.
Yeah, usually it's around 100 miles within the shore, depending on the altitude you go up, et cetera.
Right, and a Learjet can cut the corner a little bit better than us. But in flying that, which I have several times, there is a fix. In airplane, in pilot parlance, a fix is an imaginary place on the earth where they designate, it's GPS coordinates or, longitude, latitude coordinates. It is a thing where it's named, usually 5 letters, but sometimes 3. And again, I'm talking to non-pilots. And they were given the common fix that if you're leaving the Orlando area and you're heading west, it's the kind of the place you go to cut the corner of the Gulf. And it's called Cross City.
Yeah, and there's actually an airport there as well.
That's right.
So
that's why it's 3 letters.
Right. And so sometimes as well, it'll either be a VOR or an actual airport. So they'll tell us, like, go direct to the Memphis VOR and then, go direct to this next fix, et cetera. So if we go direct to the Memphis VOR, it's MEM. But if we go direct to the Memphis airport, it's KMEM.
Right.
And so in this case, they wanted them to go to Cross City, which I believe was CTY. I
think that's right, because Brian and I and his wife just returned from Sun and Fun earlier this year, and we were given Cross City as our fix.
Yeah, it's actually a fairly common fix out there, especially for the GA aircraft. And this is considered a GA aircraft. It was a business jet, but it's a
and it's located kind of in the armpit of the Florida deal.
Right. They were not supposed to go over the Gulf. They were actually, their flight plan was to go up to Cross City and then cut across so that they'd see over land.
So let's talk about that. Now, I said it's just, prudence says you don't go straight across the Gulf. But in the different rules, and again, I'm going to talk to the non-pilots, and you fly by a different set of rules depending on your airplane and your mission. And the set of rules that Lola flies, when we fly Lola, is a set of rules called Part 91.
Which is what I believe they were flying under. I think they were Part 91. Either 191 or 135. I can't remember.
Right, but there are different rules for going over water.
Right.
In 91, I can go over water.
Oh, you can do what you want in 91.
Yeah, I don't have to have a life vest for every passenger. I don't have to have a lifeboat. But for some flights, and different rules, you do. And so they may have not had a lifeboat or whatever, and so
Right.
they didn't want to cut the corner.
Yeah, like Part 121, which is airline world, we are governed by a set of rules. Like there's ETOPS, which means that you're certified for flying across the ocean, for example.
And that's where you have the right number of rafts. Every single passenger has a life jacket.
Right, exactly.
Available.
Yes. And but like in my airplane, we can fly over the Gulf, but we have a certain distance from the shore that we have to be.
All right. So the Learjet 35 takes off from Orlando International, begins its climb. Take us through what happened as it was heading on its way to the Cross City fix.
Yeah, so it started off very normally. I mean, I've taken off out of Florida before, and you climb out. About 30 seconds after you take off, you're handed over to either a center controller or an approach controller, and then they give you further climb instructions. Every air traffic controller has a designated airspace that they are responsible for. So you've got the tower controller, which controls the immediate vicinity around the airport. And then as you're climbing up, you get handed off to, typically out of a bigger airport like Orlando, it's going to be an approach or departure controller. Basically the same thing. You talk to them, and they govern a slightly larger space around that busy airport space. For example, regional approach. So I've got DFW here. I will talk to the DFW tower controllers. They'll hand me off to approach, but approach is also talking to Love Field and Addison and Meacham. So they're kind of like governing that whole space around DFW, including the other airports. And then once you get higher and further out, you're going to get handed over to a center controller. And that's what happened in this case. They got handed over to a Jacksonville center controller. But then you've got it broken down even further. You've got low altitude center controllers, which usually will govern, I think it's below like 23,000, something like that. And then you've got the high altitude sector. And that's where they'll govern above that. And so they were handed off to the low altitude center controller, who gave them climb instructions. I think it was like up to 230. And then once they started getting through their airspace, they were handed over to the high altitude sector. And then the high altitude sector said, okay, climb and maintain flight level 390. And that was their filed altitude. But then after that, nothing.
Right. And so radio silence after that point. And it was only within a few minutes, like 6 minutes.
Yeah, it wasn't super long. So,
and the last point that they were communicative was at around 23,000 feet.
230, yeah.
Yeah. So 23,000 feet, they were still talking. And then 6 minutes after 23,000 feet, they were not talking.
Correct, yeah.
So in that 6 minutes, what did you think they were climbing at? 2,000 feet a minute?
Probably around that altitude, that aircraft, depending on how heavy it was probably about 1,500, 2,000 feet per minute. I'm not a Lear 35 pilot. I want to make...
But you flew Lear 45s.
Right, which is different. It's a different airplane. It's heavier. It's got different engines on it. So even though it's made by Lear,
it's not
different. So if there's any Lear 35 pilots on here that want to throw something in the comments and correct me, please.
I'd like to know how fast they're climbing, because if they were talking at 23,000 feet and 6 minutes later they did not respond, if they're climbing 2,000 feet a minute, so 6 minutes, they could have been 12,000 feet, which would have put them at 35,000. And there's a significant level. You said in the report 5 minutes. What I was reading in the aeromedical journals is 5 to 10 minutes at...
Well, that's if you're stagnant at that altitude. They were not. They were climbing.
Right. So at 22,000 feet, you've got 5 to 10 minutes. At 35,000 feet, which is where they could have been within that 6 minutes, you've got seconds.
And here's the thing, is that it depends. It varies person to person. And a lot of it is dependent on that person's health.
Yeah, a smoker is going to get hypoxic significantly sooner than a non-smoker.
Somebody that lives in a high altitude area like Denver, for example, they're going to be able to, or somebody who's
their
like a
body's
scuba
more
diver.
acclimated.
Exactly. They're going to acclimate more, and it's going to be a lot longer versus somebody like me who does not scuba dive, and I live in a very low altitude area, and I have like all my life pretty much. I'm not used to the high altitude. In fact, fun side story, I went to Denver one time, went up to go skiing for the first time ever up there, and I actually got altitude sickness and had to had to get the little lift down.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I probably would not last super long in a very high altitude like that.
All right. And there were 2 pilots and there were 4 passengers, 6 people on board. And due to the fact that it's all different, it's not like they crossed a magic number and everybody passed out at the same time.
No, it probably happened, one by one. It was probably all within the same time frame, but being hypoxic like that is a lot like getting inebriated or drinking alcohol or something where you maybe start feeling it just hits you a lot faster. And everybody, like we said, everybody's different. You're going to get different symptoms at different times, but effectively it's like getting blackout drunk very quickly and you don't even know what's happening necessarily.
Well, and I was going to, and tell me more about the, so you can really compare it to being inebriated.
Well, I mean, I've read the
You've
studies.
read, okay.
Yeah. I've never.
Not that you've ever been inebriated.
Right. Not that I've ever been inebriated, but I've also never been in the hypoxic chamber before, which I would really like to do.
Brian Turner has, and he says that they'll go in there and the person will over the speaker will have you do math and stuff like that, and you think you're doing just fine and you're doing everything the way they're doing it. You think you're okay. Then when you get out, you're writing gibberish.
There is an audio clip out there somewhere in the YouTube space of a pilot. I don't remember if he was flying a Citation or a Learjet or something, but he's at I want to say it was in the 20s and 30s, and he's talking to the controllers, and he starts slurring his words. He legitimately sounds like he's drunk, and they somehow coax him into getting the airplane to a lower altitude, and it's like he recovers like that.
Well, and that is the thing about hypoxia. The cure is oxygen, and the effect of the cure is almost instantaneous.
Yeah, we need to find that clip though. I remember the first time I ever heard that, it was spooky.
Yeah, so I have felt hypoxic at times, and looking at my blood oxygen and everything else with a safety pilot. And I know that even into the 80s, it's not that big of a deal for me personally, because once a month, we would live at 9,000 feet in Colorado. So my body's a little bit acclimated, not a lot, but a little bit. But I would get a headache first. But then after a while, getting really low with the blood oxygen, I start to get tunnel vision. And that's, you've got your rods and cones and is it the rods on the outside or the cones on the outside? Whatever it is, those are the first things. Your body will start to shut the extremities down first, right? So the outside of your eyes shut down, and that's why you get tunnel vision.
Right.
But anyway, and you get stupid. So, all right. Well, Christy, as a 121, as an airline pilot, in Lola, I don't have emergency oxygen masks. What are those like in a Learjet or a Citation jet? Are they within reach? Are you supposed to be able to grab and don those masks in a certain amount of time? What are the rules around the jets, the 135 operations, or even 91 Learjet operations?
I know that it's part of the certification of the airplane. I know in 121 we have the quick donning masks. We had those in the Citation as well.
And they look like something from the movie Alien, right?
I mean, sort of. They're masks, but they're designed so that you can literally pull it out within like a second, and you put it on. You rip off your headset, you put on the quick donning mask, and it seals around your face. And it's supposed to be like that. So, yeah.
And that's one reason why guys can't have beards.
I mean,
Are they loosening that?
That's the theory. I do know that there are cargo airlines, and Hawaiian Airlines actually allows.
And a lot of foreign airlines allow.
Yeah, they allow their pilots, but I mean, Hawaiian Airlines is a U.S. carrier, and they allow their pilots to have facial hair.
Well, you can have mustaches.
Well, you're right, but they allow them to have beards.
Okay.
That I do know because I had a friend that worked for Hawaiian, and I was like, whoa.
I go through. We have a stock video library that I use for supplementing some of the B-roll on some of the taking off videos, and I've got all this pilot footage that they have on there, but the pilot has a beard, and I'm like, I'm going to get so slammed if I use that footage.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Unless they're like a very specific cargo carrier, I think. Like Southern Air or one of those carriers allows it, but yeah, no. I think I want to say it's more about the prudence of it because it used to be as well that but prior to COVID, we used to have to wear oxygen masks above a certain altitude.
I thought I read that too.
Yeah, if one pilot was not in the flight deck, so if you went, I forgot what it was oh gosh, I'm having like a complete brain spasm, but. Basically, if like I know in the citation, if we were up at like 41,000 feet, we were going to have to wear these oxygen masks. But then after COVID, they completely changed it.
Well, I thought in my research a little while back, I thought I read something about in some like 135 operations or whatever, above certain 35,000 or whatever that one pilot had to wear a mask.
Right, and that was especially if. Here, I'm looking it up right now. Yeah, I'm looking it up. It was especially if you had one pilot that got up and went to use the lavatory, for example. If they left the flight deck.
Okay. So let's go back now to the Payne Stewart Learjet 35. What could they have? What would have happened if one pilot had realized what was going on and had grabbed the mask?
Then they would have received the oxygen, and they would have been able to stop the climb and get the airplane down.
They would have lowered the airplane.
Yeah, okay. So it says it's a Part 135 requirement here. Whenever a pressurized aircraft is operating at altitudes above 35,000 feet MSL, at least one pilot at the controls shall wear secured and sealed the oxygen mask.
Okay.
But we don't do that anymore.
All right. So Payne Stewart's airplane continued to climb, and it climbed all the way past 40,000 feet. Did it oscillate? It come up and down? I think I vaguely remember something about that.
I don't think it oscillated. So what it sounds like happened is they put the autopilot on. They had it set to a climb, and it just maintained that climb. But what's really interesting about this particular case, so when I fly the 175, and again, Lear 35 pilots, please chime in. We set the altitude, right? We did it in the citation. We do it in basically every jet that I've flown. You dial in the altitude, and the airplane will automatically level off at that altitude. For some reason, this airplane didn't do it. And I don't know if it's a limitation of that particular airplane with the autopilot or if they didn't set the altitude and all they did was just set
a climb. Maybe, yeah, it was like, we're going to do a 2,000 foot a minute climb.
Right, but without
a
setting.
ceiling.
Yeah, because I know some autopilots you actually have to hit like an altitude button for it to, get an altitude, I guess, out of it. But
yeah.
I don't know. That's why I'm saying, like, I'm not a Lear 35 pilot. I've actually never been inside of a Lear 35.
Well, other significant differences between this and the Citation 5 that crashed recently, the plane did not return to its origin. It actually it went over the cross-city fix and just went straight. So back then, 1999, they didn't have GPS as common, right?
Yes and no. But here's the thing with the Citation is a lot of people are like, oh, it was just going to return to its origin. I don't think that's what it was doing. I think what the Citation was doing was it climbed up, it went to its airport, and then when basically, because what'll happen in the 175, for example, is once you pass your fix and there's nothing else after that fix, it just reverts to heading mode. It keeps you on that heading. And if you look at that flight track for the Citation, it just stayed on its heading. Coincidentally, it just happened to be about where the departure point was for the airplane. But it took, when it crossed over the airport and it had nothing left in the GPS, it didn't revert back to its departure city. It just went to heading mode. So it just stayed on a
Oh,
heading.
so you think they probably had a heading. Oh, interesting.
Right.
Okay.
And the other thing, so what I think personally, and I could be wrong, but in Payne Stewart's crash, they gave them cross city and then direct to Love Field. Okay.
Right.
But the airplane didn't do that. So I wonder if they were becoming hypoxic early on and they weren't putting in, because when a controller gives us if they say, okay, once you hit this fix, you're direct to whatever, we put it in the box. After this, we
but
bring it
a
in.
Lear 35 in 1999 wasn't going to have an RNAV or,
Well, it doesn't matter. The airplane's still going to fly the path that you put in. It's not necessarily RNAV.
Well, I
it's
don't
a
know what kind of flight
point-to-point.
management system they had.
I can tell you because not necessarily the Lear 35, but even in 1999, the Citation that I used to fly had an early 90s universal FMS in it, which is a very basic one, and you can still plug in your points.
Okay.
So if the controllers told them, okay, after this, you're going to go direct to here, you can put that in.
So clearly the complete flight plan was not put into any kind of, if it had an FMS system, which most likely it did, right?
Yeah, I'm sure it did.
So they did not put in the whole system.
Well, they either did and they didn't activate it, or they were in the middle of doing something. I'm wondering if they were becoming hypoxic and not realizing what was going on and just smashing buttons or something. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like you said, they were doing math and they thought they were getting the answers right, but they were actually writing gibberish or whatever. I wonder if that's what happened. I wonder if they were like, okay, direct to, left field. And they were putting in stuff, but they just didn't put it in correctly because they were already declining in their mental faculties. Because why else would this airplane, even in the Citation hit all of its points on its flight plan. This
Right.
airplane did not. And the question is why? And so for me, that's when I think about it as a pilot, I'm going, okay, well, they didn't garbage in, garbage out when it comes to the FMS. The airplane's going to fly exactly what you put in, which means they didn't put something in. They
Right.
were either on heading mode and didn't go to navigation mode. So they might have had it in, but they might have been flying heading and not necessarily
That's true.
navigating, and before they started getting incapacitated. And so they probably didn't think about it. I personally think that this airplane was having pressurization issues pretty much from the beginning. But the other question is, why wasn't there an oral warning going off? Especially early on in the transmissions with ATC, there's nothing in the background. That was one of the things that the the NTSB looked at, was where are the oral warnings for the altitude, the cabin altitude. We get those, at 10,000 feet. They were at 230, no oral warnings. But then in the last 30 minutes of that CVR, you can hear the oral warnings.
Okay, so the oral warnings existed in the plane, so they were clearly going off. You just, why didn't they listen to that when it went off, when they were in that 6 minutes between responding at flight level 230 and...
Right. So did they have a faulty oral warning system? Was it a gradual decompressurization there's just a lot of questions there.
Yeah.
Was it a rapid decompression where they just lost consciousness within like 5 seconds? We don't know. And the sad thing is, we don't even know the state of, maybe they were in the middle of grabbing their oxygen masks when they passed out. Maybe they grabbed the oxygen mask, but they were, and didn't put it on correctly. We don't know, because unfortunately and tragically, the airplane it was a crater when it crashed. It fell out of the sky in 3 minutes.
They did find some pieces, and I remember reading about that the they were able to determine that the masks worked, but they don't know, they don't know what happened. They have no clue.
Yeah, exactly. They don't know specifically what happened. I've been in a situation where I was in a Citation Bravo with that when we took off, the pressurization system was not working correctly. And it was working, but then it would get stuck. And then it was working, and then it would get stuck. And fortunately, very fortunately, I saw something that in fact, it was this accident that makes me so hyper preventative on pressurization systems. And I always have been. We took off, we're climbing out. I noticed that my ears felt kind of weird and different. And we're climbing, and it just doesn't feel right. And I looked at the little digital readout on the pressurization system, and it was erratic. Normally, it's a very constant like number on there, but this one was doing this. I mean, it was just coming up and down, 2,000 feet all the way down to like 100 feet, 2,000 feet, 100. And that's not supposed to happen. And I told my captain, hey, man, there's something going on here. So we level off, tell ATC we're leveling off to troubleshoot a problem. And he like reset the system, thought that he got it working. We start climbing again, and it's doing that again. I was like, hey, this thing is not working. We get the cabin altitude warning. And at that point, we realized something was very wrong. We leveled off, got back down under 10,000 feet, and said we needed to go back to Love Field, like ASAP. And it turned out that when we landed, we called the maintenance people out there. They looked at it, and it had a faulty outflow valve that was basically getting stuck. And so it was that could have been a bad situation had we not had our mental faculties, had we been higher and it had started acting out. Yeah, that could have been a very bad thing. I'm very glad that it wasn't.
So in the Learjet 35 Payne Stewart crash, the NTSB did report that the oxygen bottle pressure regulator was open and the masks were connected. So according to the evidence that they have, the oxygen and mask were available. Now, they don't know if they were used or not, but they were available to the two pilots.
And we just don't know. I mean,
we just don't know.
We don't know because nobody could see inside it either. We don't know if maybe they grabbed the mask, they just didn't get them on in time. We'll never know, unfortunately.
So aftermath, of course, the company, the charter company, not only, this is something we put a little bit into the video, the investigation video, but the FBI gets involved and they go after the chief pilot, James Watkins Sr. And by the way, I could be wrong, and you guys who know more, leave comments at YouTube on this podcast. I believe the owner of the company was James Watkins Jr. His dad was a senior pilot. He was using his dad as senior pilot, I think. And the FBI was alleging that Watkins Sr. was falsifying the pilot logbooks so that pilots who maybe didn't have enough time and type for insurance or whatever, he was pencil whipping it. That's what the FBI was alleging, the FBI and FAA. And so for 8 years, they investigated and chased after Sunjet and the Watkins. And it took its toll on Sunjet. And by 2006, Sunjet just could not keep their doors open anymore, and they went out of business. I think they sold the assets or whatever. 2008, the FAA drops their investigation on trying to revoke the certificates of the pilot certificates of Watkins and six other pilots at Sunjet, and then the FBI follows suit as well as far as dropping its investigation. So at the end of the day, the FBI and the FAA found nothing, but they certainly alleged stuff for 8 years and destroyed a company and whatever. Now, I'm not saying the Watkins were innocent or that they were guilty. I'm merely saying here's what happened. The facts were the FBI and the FAA alleged in 2000 and 2001 to these discrepancies and to this, logbook pencil whipping, and chased it, and then they dropped it for no causal factors. So
yeah,
that's sad.
It is sad. I mean, but at the end of the day, I don't know enough about Sunjet Aviation, and there is very little.
Yeah, they could be great guys. It could be crooks. We don't know.
Yeah, there's not enough information out there, honestly, when I was doing my research for this story to get a good insight with the company. They didn't have, I didn't find any interviews with prior employees or anything like that. I gathered some information about the two pilots of 47 Bravo Alpha, Michael Kling and Stephanie Bilagurigu. Again, I say this in the video. I am so sorry if I mispronounce her name. I mean, absolutely no disrespect.
Tell me about the pilots.
So I know that Michael Kling, he was 42, 43, I think. He was a prior Air Force pilot. And from all accounts, he was a very good pilot. He flew, I think, KC-135s and stuff.
Oh, wow.
I mean, yeah. I mean, very good, very sharp pilot. He was one of those guys that went into the Air Force and went into pilot training very young. Stephanie, her family was from Central America. Her dad was a doctor. They moved to North America in the 1980s. After high school, she decided she wanted to be a pilot. She actually went to Embry-Riddle.
Okay.
And graduated from Embry-Riddle. She was an up-and-coming pilot. Now, you have to remember that this was during a time where getting a job as a pilot was not necessarily the easiest thing. I mean, I think 99, it was okay, but it got really bad, obviously, after 9/11. But it wasn't great in the 90s. So it's not like she could hit 1,500 hours and then go off to the airlines.
And get your job right away.
Right. In fact, you didn't even need your ATP at this time to go to the airlines. You just needed to be a commercial pilot with a multi-engine certificate. And she was building flight time. I could not find anything about what her goals were. This was before social media and before YouTube and all of that. But we know that she wanted to be a professional pilot and that she was very, very eager to get those flight hours and experience needed to continue climbing the aviation ladder. So to me, it's so sad. It's just so sad. Two really good pilots, very eager, very experienced. I mean, gosh, Michael Kling, the captain, he was very experienced. I mean, Stephanie may not have been as experienced, but she definitely, from all accounts that I could read, she was had the right attitude.
Yeah, and she was at 1,751 hours total time, and she had actually quite a bit of hours with Sunjet, 251 hours. And she had 99 as a Learjet second in command, which isn't bad. And so the captain, like you said, was in the Air Force. He had a total of 4,280 hours, and he had 60 hours with Sunjet and 38 as the pilot in command of the Learjet. So not huge, but not bad. And it wasn't pilot error. Although the NTSB does kind of put it that their probable cause was because of the pilot's failure to get supplemental oxygen. So it's on the pilots to get, when the oxygen goes down, they've got to get those masks on.
Right. But that doesn't necessarily mean it was their fault that they didn't get it. As we know, I mean, obviously, I can't imagine a scenario in which both of them would not want to get it. It means that something happened that completely limited their ability to do that.
Yeah. And so the aftermath, of course, the two pilots we talked about, Payne Stewart, we talked about, Payne's agent and the agent's boss were on board as well, and an architect, a golf course architect. So those were the four. And, it was after an incredible year for Payne Stewart. He was third on the money list. He had just won the 1999 U.S. Open with a dramatic 18th hole putt against Phil Mickelson on Father's Day. Phil had just become a father. Payne was a father. I remember watching that on TV and how in the midst of celebrating the win, Payne sought out Phil to give him a consolation hug, and he whispered in his ear. Later, it was revealed that that becoming a father is a much bigger joy than winning the U.S. Open. And it was hard for Phil because he was known as the best player who has never won a major, which is it's an official, a semi-official kind of nomenclature on the PGA Tour. You don't want to be that guy,
right?
And he was that guy for a long time, and he eventually did shake that, and he won a major. But then Payne was on his way to Dallas to consult about a golf course build, and then he was heading down to Houston for the end of the year big tournament that the top money winners would play in, and so he didn't make that. He was inducted into the World Golf Hall of Fame, and the family that owned the land where the Learjet crashed. What?
Yeah, in a true act of just unbelievable kindness, they actually donated that piece of land effectively to a memorial for the crash victims. It's my understanding that family still owns the land up there. They worked together with the spouses of the individuals who died, and they created this nice little memorial for them, which I think is just, it's a very kind and generous act, that kind of brought these strangers together. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
I think, honestly, in addition to the obvious learning lessons about hypoxia and pressurization systems and things like that, the big lesson that comes out of this as well is that tomorrow is not guaranteed. And, a lot like Payne Stewart, we need to, maybe have those self-awakenings and live life to the fullest, love the people around us to the best of our abilities while we're here. Life is short. We just don't know how short.
Yeah, those are good takeaways. All right, well, thank you guys for watching and listening. If you're on YouTube podcast, we can only upload video, so we've got that 360 thing going. If you're on Spotify, Amazon, Apple, all those other places for podcasts, then you're just listening to us, and we want to thank you. And don't forget our sponsors. They are all listed on our YouTube channel. They're all run by aviation people, so we can keep it in the aviation family. Supporting them supports us. So we really appreciate you guys. Stay safe.
See you next time on the Taking Off podcast.